Yo, what up? I sometimes make pretty long videos reflecting on shallow issues. Shallow, but sometimes, pragmatic, interesting, or useful for people's lives in some other way. This is going to be a pretty short video about a reasonably profound question. One of the most requested topics for me to make a video about, has been for me to speak more about nihilism and what nihilism means to me. I find it very easy to talk about nihilism with people face to face, when I know them and they know me, even if they're people who know me in a shallow way. Talking about philosophy in a context like this one is difficult because people have very different ideas of what philosophy is or why we're talking about it. I think that most people have the mistaken assumption that the only reason for a philosophy to exist is for me to try to convert other people to that philosophy, in the same sense that some religions, not all, want to convert everyone to believe in them, and in a sense the religion only exists in order to convince other people of its value. That is not why I have a philosophy, and I think that is not a legitimate reason for why philosophy exists as a field of study, or why anyone would individually study philosophy or have a philosophy personally. Certainly the concept of having a philosophy is worth reflecting on, is worth thinking about at some length. From my perspective, a philosophy is a problem-solving method. Like Karl Popper, I view philosophy as instrumental in this sense, as a way of understanding things. For me, nihilism is a very positive doctrine, and I use the term historical nihilism, which I in effect have reinvented. I haven't invented the term, but I've reinvented it to refer to the form of nihilism I myself practice. By contrast, atheism is just a statement that God does not exist, or gods, plural, don't exist. It's negating a particular belief. Nihilism is an approach to knowing the world that begins from the profound assumption that there is nothing to be believed in. So stepping away from God, you can talk about something like beauty or goodness, virtue. I do not look at the world as if beauty is something that exists out there for me to understand, for me to discover, as something that's imposed on me by society or just by what I see. I think of the world more in terms of a blank canvas onto which I have to paint, onto which I have to project, onto which I have to assert my ideas. And in this sense, something like beauty, I'm not merely saying that it's in the eye of the beholder. I'm saying that in a radical sense, it's something shifting and unreliable, that I, as the observer, am really involved in creating as an artist. What is good and what is evil? A very crude religious view of the world would suggest that these are ideas that exist before we're born, that exist in the same sense as a rock exists on the side of the road, as something we discover, we see, we apprehend, that we have to learn about, that we have to follow, that we may be right or wrong about. You may see the rock by the side of the road, or you may fail to see it and you may trip over it, but that good and evil, beauty and ugliness, are things that simply exist out there, independent of ourselves. And the form of nihilism, epistemologically, that I'm talking about is at the opposite extreme from that perspective. And that does not mean that good and evil are of no importance. On this channel, I moralize a great deal. I talk about good and evil and ethics and morality. But I am very conscious of my role. Again, a step beyond merely saying beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm aware of my role in creating and distorting and recreating these things, and that to a very large extent, in terms of the realm of values, in terms of the realm of what most people think of as beliefs, I'm really sitting in front of a blank canvas. I'm really encountering things that I myself have created although many people, I think, mistakenly believe that these are not human-created values, perhaps because they were taught them by their grandparents, perhaps because of a particular religious conviction, or perhaps, just out of laziness. You can live your whole life without ever questioning what's beautiful and what's ugly, what's good and what's evil, what's delicious and what's revolting. So that is this kind of simple epistemological and ethical side of it, of nihilism as a challenge to values and how we think about values. Now, values matter, and it doesn't mean that everyone's values are equal, not at all. This is an analysis, this is a way of thinking about reality. And, among other things, this recognizes why one man considers something beautiful that another doesn't, why one man considers something good that another man considers evil, and it's an analysis that's compatible with the cacophony of the society we all live in. It explains reality, it comprehends reality, it lets us live with reality. It does not set down a standard for how reality ought to be. It explicates how reality actually is. And again, that's why this is philosophy, not religion, not dogmatism. This is philosophy as a problem-solving method in the tradition of Karl Popper. Now, the term historical nihilism, the term I've chosen, I've reappropriated or reinvented, that is the term used by the government of China today, the Communist government of China in 2016, to describe the opposite of their official doctrine or belief as something. It's illegal, it's banned, it's the view they do not want people to believe in. And that is very telling, because the government of China wants people to believe in history, to have a faith in history, a kind of religion of history. And history matters to me enormously, the same way I've just said ethics, good and evil matter enormously. But again, I regard history as that kind of blank canvas where, and again, it's not a passive view of the world. As an artist, as an intellectual, as a researcher, it is up to me to do the research, to do the understanding, to manifest or create those meanings out of history, to find the morals, if you like, in history, to not just learn the lessons of history. It's something passive that already exists, but in a sense, you have to write the lessons of history for yourself and then learn them. It's just a much more active model of how these things work. But in the same sense that I think there is nothing to be believed in a God, in beauty, in good or evil, there is nothing to be believed in history. So it's looking at history with a profound awareness that individuals make arbitrary decisions that have terrible consequences for people all over the world, that history doesn't follow a divine plan. There's no fate, it's not the will of God, but that also it doesn't follow the kind of semi-divine plan that the Communist Party of China believes in. Because communism in China is an atheist set of beliefs, but they nevertheless think that history has a kind of magical quality to it, that history is inevitable, that it follows a plan, that it's a sequence of stages, rational. Originally, by Hegel, he's supposed to be the mind of God unfolding, but so-called material dialectics, they have this very peculiar philosophy of history that is almost like a religion. And they want the people of China to believe in history so that, for example, they believe when millions of people were killed in political violence that was necessary and that was a stage in the development of history and that the next stage is better and better. And so you can't simply lament as a tragedy or regret that one person who happened to be in political power made terrible decisions with terrible consequences. So historical nihilism, in choosing that term, I'm putting focus on those sort of political and social aspects, especially relevant to China and the history of Asia, obviously relevant to the history of Europe also. So the point is here, another way to say this, talking about the blank canvas of the artist, history doesn't make sense. History doesn't have meaning. We can make sense out of it as intellectuals. We can find meaning in it. We can ascribe meaning to it. Again, projecting meaning, not discovering it as something existing like a rock by the side of the road. There are other historical moments when nihilism became an important idea. In the history of Russia, nihilism was a contrast to communism. It was a different way for people to care about the poor that didn't involve killing the rich, which is important and worth remembering. There is a famous novel by Turgenev, a novel called Fathers and Sons. It's a very enjoyable novel, and nihilism is a major theme in it. And for many people in the world, that woke them up to the idea of nihilism. The nihilists in Russia had a phrase, that one of their catchphrases politically was, "Go to the poor, be the poor." So this was advice for rich people wanting to be active. So don't march in the streets. Don't think of yourselves in the crazy way the communists do. You want to help the poor, go to the poor, be the poor. And for me as a young man, that spoke to me in contrast to many of the crazy ideas around me. And to some extent, it's had practice in my life. When I went to a country like Laos, I was not living like a Lao farmer. I was not really living like a local poor person. But still, there has been an important aspect of my life actually going to the poor, being the poor, whoever the people were I was studying or the people I was trying to help, of going and living with them and among them and understanding things from their perspective. So that has been a part of my life. And that it's part of the flavor of nihilism in my life. But I do not identify as a Russian nihilist. I do not have connections with any of the specific Russian ideologies. But I recognize that's part of the history of the word. And aesthetically, it's part of what people associate with nihilism. And there was one other philosopher called Max Stirner. Max Stirner was very poorly translated into English. If you can't read German and you haven't done a lot of historical research, is basically incomprehensible in English today. You have to know so much about the milieu to read him. But Stirner also was a really interesting moment in the history of philosophy. And he directly influenced Karl Marx, and he directly influenced many, many people. He directly influenced Nietzsche and others. Now, Stirner, I actually do not agree with profoundly. Again, like Russian, doesn't really have anything to do with my version of nihilism. But again, his philosophy and the debates surrounding his philosophy were another moment in history when nihilism seemed to become important and people thought about the meaning of the word. Okay, so I think that's enough to say in this video. Really, the deeper question for people to ask is, what is the meaning of philosophy? And what is the point of having a philosophy in your life? With some people I have known, again, including people I knew in a kind of shallow way, there have been times when I talked to them about like peace and war. And they were really surprised how pragmatic and useful what I was saying was, how different it was from all the political things they've heard, left-wing or right-wing. And they've asked me, well, what is my political philosophy? And then I start talking about nihilism. And it actually does have a really positive message in application to peace and war and politics. And they actually get really inspired and what have you. So, I mean, I think that's an incongruous thing. Nihilism, I would not call it empowering. I think for many people, if you've grown up in a world of fixed values, of received beliefs and assumptions, it feels liberating. But it also puts more responsibility on you. It's really saying you are not the observer, you are the artist in relation to the world of values. And so much of what we debate in this world does consist of values: good, evil, beautiful, ugly, and, ethical issues underlying peace and war and the hard decisions we make. Of course, nihilism is not like classical skepticism in that sense, because it's not questioning whether or not the number 6 is really different from the number 7. It's not about that kind of technical challenge that many academics spend a lot of their time debating. All right, I think that's enough for now. For those of you who were interested, because I did get many emails asking me to talk about the meaning of the word nihilism for me, I get to press the stop button at under 15 minutes. I hope you take something away from it.